Hey everyone, it's Coria Chavez, the recruitment specialist of Girl Scouts of Southwest Texas, once again welcoming you to another episode of our Girl Scout Virtual Book Club. Today we are going to be reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 13, Nicholas Flamel. So at the end of this, like normal, we are going to have some trivia questions and then we are going to get into an activity. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 13. Dumbledore had convinced Harry not to go looking for the Mirror of Erised again, and for the rest of Christmas holidays, the invisibility cloak stayed folded in the bottom of Harry's trunk. Harry wished that he could forget what he'd seen in the mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He started having nightmares. Over and over again, he dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light while a high voice cackled with laughter. "You see, Dumbledore was right. That mirror could drive you mad," said Ron when Harry told him about these dreams. Hermione, who came back a day before term started, took a different view of things. She was torn between horror at the idea of Harry being out of bed, roaming the school 3 nights in a row, if Filch had caught you, then disappointment that he hadn't at least found out who Nicholas Flamel was. They had almost given up hope of ever finding Flamel in a library book even though Harry was still sure he'd read the name somewhere. Once term had started, they were back on skimming through books for 10 minutes during breaks, Harry even less time than the other two because Quidditch practice had started again. Wood was working the team harder than ever, even at the endless rain that had replaced the snow couldn't dampen his spirits. The Weasleys complained that Wood was becoming a fanatic, but Harry was on Wood's side. If they won their next match against Hufflepuff, they would overtake Slytherin in the house championship for the first time in 7 years. Quite apart from the wanting to win, Harry found that he had fewer nightmares when he was tired out after training. Then, during one particularly wet, muddy practice session, Wood gave the team a bit of bad news. He'd just gotten very angry with the Weasleys, who kept dive-bombing each other and pretending to fall off the brooms. "Will you stop messing around?" he yelled. "That's exactly the sort of thing that'll lose us the match. Snape's refereeing this time, and he'll be looking for any excuse to knock points off of Gryffindor." George Weasley really did fall off his broom at these words. "Snape's refereeing?" He spluttered through the mouthful of mud. "When's he ever refereed a Quidditch match? He's not going to be fair if we might overtake Slytherin." The rest of the team landed next to George to complain too. "It's not my fault," said Wood. "We've just got to make sure to play a clean game, so Snape hasn't got an excuse to pick on us." Which was all very well, thought Harry, but he had another reason for not wanting Snape near him while he was playing Quidditch. The rest of the team hung back to talk to one another as usual at the end of practice, but Harry headed straight back to the Gryffindor common room where he found Ron and Hermione playing chess. Chess was the only thing Hermione ever lost at, something Harry and Ron thought was very good for her. "Don't talk to me for a moment," said Ron when Harry sat down next to him. "I need to concentrate." He caught sight of Harry's face. "What's the matter with you? You look terrible." Speaking quietly so that no one else could hear, Harry told the other two about Snape's sudden, sinister desire to be a Quidditch referee. "Don't play," said Hermione at once. Say you're ill. Pretend to break your leg," Hermione suggested. "Really break your leg," said Ron. "I can't," said Harry. "There isn't a reserve seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all." At that moment, Neville toppled into the common room. How he had managed to climb through the portrait hole was anyone's guess, because his legs had been stuck together with what they recognized at once was a leg locker curse. He must have had to bunny hop all the way up to Gryffindor Tower. Everyone fell over laughing except Hermione, who leapt up and performed the counter curse. Neville's legs sprang apart and he got up to his feet, trembling. "What happened?" Hermione asked him, leading him over to sit with Harry and Ron. "Malfoy," Neville said shakily. "I met him outside the library, and he'd been looking for someone to practice that on." "Go to Professor McGonagall," Hermione urged Neville. "Report him." Neville shook his head. "You've got to stand up to him, Neville," said Ron. "He's used to walking all over people, but that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier." "There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be in Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that," Neville choked out. Harry felt in the pocket of his robes and pulled out a chocolate frog, the very last one from the box Hermione had given him for Christmas. He gave it to Neville, who looked as though he might cry. "You're worth 12 of Malfoy." Harry said. "The Sorting Hat chose you for Gryffindor, didn't it? And where's Malfoy? In stinking Slytherin." Neville's lips twitched into a weak smile as he unwrapped the frog. "Thanks, Harry. I think I'll go to bed. Do you want the card? You collect them, don't you?" As Neville walked away, Harry looked at the famous wizard card. "Dumbledore again," he said. "He was the first one I ever—" He gasped. He stared at the back of the card, then he looked up at Ron and Hermione. "I found him," he whispered. "I found Flamel. I told you I'd read the name somewhere before. I read it on the train coming here. Listen to this. Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the Dark Wizard Grindelwald in 1945 and for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood and his work on alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel." Hermione jumped to her feet. She hadn't looked so excited since they had gone back the marks for the very first piece of homework. "Stay there," she said, and she sprinted upstairs to the girls' dormitories. Harry and Ron barely had time to exchange mystified looks when she was dashing back an enormous old book in her arms. "I've never thought to look in here," she whispered excitedly. "I got this out of the library weeks ago for a bit of light reading." "Light," said Ron, but Hermione told him to be quiet until she'd looked something up and started flicking frantically through the pages, muttering to herself. At last, she found what she was looking for. "I knew it! I knew it!" "Are we allowed to speak yet?" said Ron grumpily. Hermione ignored him. "Nicholas Flamel," she whispered dramatically, "is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone." This didn't have quite the effect she'd expected. "The what?" said Harry and Ron. "Oh, honestly, don't you two read?" "Look, read that, there." She pushed the book toward them and Harry and Ron read. "The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with the making of the Sorcerer's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There will have been many reports of the Sorcerer's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Perenelle, 658. "See," said Hermione. When Harry and Ron had finished, the dog must be guarding the Flamel's Sorcerer's Stone. I bet he asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him because they're friends and he knew someone was after it. That's why he wanted the stone moved out of Gringotts." "A stone that makes gold and stops you from ever dying," said Harry. "No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want it." "And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in the study of recent developments in wizardry," said Ron. "He's not exactly recent if he's 665, is he?" The next morning, in Defense Against the Dark Arts, while copying down different ways of treating werewolf bites, Harry and Ron were still discussing what they'd do to Sorcerer's Stone if they had one. It wasn't until Ron said that he'd buy his own Quidditch team that Harry remembered about Snape and the coming match. "I'm going to play," he told Ron and Hermione. "If I don't, all the Slytherins will think I'm just too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. It'll really wipe the smiles off their faces if we win." "Just as long as we're not wiping you off the field," said Hermione. As the match drew nearer, however, Harry became more and more nervous about whatever he told Ron and Hermione. The rest of the team wasn't too calm either. The idea of overtaking Slytherin in the house championship was wonderful. No one had done it for 7 years, but would they be allowed to, with such a biased referee? Harry didn't know whether he was imagining it or not, but he seemed to keep running into Snape wherever he went. At times he even wondered whether Snape was following him, trying to catch him on his own. Potions lessons were turning into sort of a weekly torture. Snape was so horrible to Harry. Could Snape possibly know that they'd found out about the Sorcerer's Stone? Harry didn't see how he could, yet he sometimes had the horrible feeling that Snape could read minds. Harry knew when they wished him good luck outside the locker rooms the next afternoon that Ron and Hermione were wondering whether they'd ever see him alive again. This wasn't what you'd call comforting. Harry hardly heard a word of Wood's pep talk. He pulled on his Quidditch robes and picked up his Nimbus 2000. Ron and Hermione, meanwhile, had found a place in the stands next to Neville, who couldn't understand why they looked so grim and worried, or why they had both brought their wands to the match. Little did Harry know that Ron and Hermione had been secretly practicing the Lake Locker curse. They had gotten the idea from Malfoy using it on Neville and were ready to use it on Snape if he showed any sign of wanting to hurt Harry. "Now, don't forget, it's locomotor mortis." said Hermione. Hermione muttered as Ron slipped his wand up his sleeve. I know, Ron snapped. Don't nag. Back in the locker room, Wood had taken Harry aside. Don't want to pressure you, Potter, but if we ever need an early capture of the snitch, it's now. Finish the game before Snape can favor Hufflepuff too much. The whole school's out there, said Fred Weasley, peering out of the door. Even, blimey, Dumbledore's come to watch. Harry's heart did a somersault. Dumbledore, he said, dashing to the door to make sure. Fred was right. There was no mistaking that silver beard. Harry could have laughed out loud with relief. He was safe. There was simply no way that Snape would dare try to hurt him if Dumbledore was watching. Perhaps that was why Snape was looking so angry at the teams as the teams marched onto the field, something Ron noticed too. I've never seen Snape look so mean, he told Hermione. Look, they're off. Ouch. Someone had poked Ron in the back of the head. It was Malfoy. Oh, sorry, Weasley. Didn't see you there. Malfoy grinned broadly at Crabbe and Goyle. I wonder how long Potter's going to stay on his broom this time. Anyone want to bet? What about you, Weasley? Ron didn't answer. Snape had just awarded Hufflepuff a penalty because George Weasley had hit a bludger at him. Hermione, who had all of her fingers crossed in her lap, was squinting fixedly at Harry, who was circling the game like a hawk looking for the snitch. You know how I think they choose people for the Gryffindor team, said Malfoy loudly a few minutes later, as Snape awarded Hufflepuff another penalty for no reason at all. It's people that they feel sorry for. See, there's Potter, who's got no parents. Then there's the Weasleys. They've got no money. You should be on the team, Longbottom. You've got no brains. Neville went bright red, but turned in his seat to face Malfoy. I'm worth 12 of you, Malfoy, he stammered. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle howled with laughter, but Ron, still not daring to take his eyes off the game, said, You tell him, Neville. Longbottom. If brains were gold, you'd be poorer than Weasley, and that's saying something. Ron's nerves were already stretched to the breaking point with anxiety about Harry. I'm warning you, Malfoy. One more word. Ron, said Hermione suddenly. Harry. What? Where? Harry had suddenly gone into a spectacular dive, which drew gasps and cheers from the crowd. Hermione stood up, her crossed fingers in her mouth, as Harry streaked toward the ground like a bullet. You're in luck, Weasley. Potter's obviously spotted some money on the ground, said Malfoy. Ron snapped. Before Malfoy knew what was happening, Ron was on top of him, wrestling him to the ground. Neville hesitated, then clambered over the back of his seat to help. Come on, Harry, Hermione screamed, leaping onto her seat to watch as Harry sped straight at Snape. She didn't even notice Malfoy and Ron rolling around under her seat, or the scuffles of yelps coming from the whirlwind of fists that Neville and Crabbe and Goyle. Up in the air, Snape turned on his broomstick just in time to see something scarlet shoot past him, missing him by inches. The next second, Harry had pulled out of the dive, his arm raised in triumph. The snitch was clasped in his hand. The stands erupted. It had to be a record. No one could ever remember the snitch being caught so quickly. Ron, where are you? The game's over. Harry's won. We've won. Gryffindor's in the lead, shrieked Hermione, dancing up and down on her seat and hugging Parvati Patil in the row in front. Harry jumped off his broom, a foot from the ground. He couldn't believe it. He'd done it. The game was over. It was barely lasted 5 minutes. As Gryffindors came piling onto the field, he saw Snape land nearby, white-faced and tight-lipped. Then Harry felt a hand on his shoulder, and he looked up at Dumbledore's smiling face. Well done, said Dumbledore quietly, so that only Harry could hear. Nice to see you haven't been brooding about that mirror. Been keeping busy. Excellent. Snape spat bitterly on the ground. Harry left the locker room alone some time later to take his Nimbus 2000 back to the broom shed. He couldn't ever remember feeling happier. He'd really done something to be proud of. Now, no one could say that he was just a famous name anymore. The evening air had never smelled so sweet. He walked over to the damp grass, reliving the last hour in his head, which was a happy blur. Gryffindors running to lift him onto his shoulders, Ron and Hermione in the distance, jumping up and down, Ron cheering through a heavy nosebleed. Harry had reached the shed. He leaned against the wooden door and looked up at Hogwarts with its windows glowing red in the setting sun. Gryffindor in the lead. He'd done it. He'd shown Snape. And speaking of Snape, a hooded figure came swiftly down the front steps of the castle. Clearly not wanting to be seen, it walked as fast as possible toward the Forbidden Forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched. He recognized the figure's prowling walk, Snape, sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. What was going on? Harry jumped back onto the Nimbus 2000 and took off. Gliding silently over the castle, he saw Snape enter the forest at a run, and he followed. The trees were so thick he couldn't see where Snape had gone. He flew in circles, lower and lower, brushing the top branches of trees until he heard voices. He glided toward them and landed noiselessly in a towering beech tree. He climbed carefully along one of the branches, holding tight to his broomstick, trying to see through the leaves. Below in the shadowy clearing stood Snape, but he wasn't alone. Quirrell was out there too. Harry couldn't make out the look on his face, but he was stuttering worse than ever. Harry strained to catch what they were saying. Don't know why you wanted to meet me here of all places, Severus. Oh, I thought we'd keep this private, said Snape, his voice icy. Students aren't supposed to know about the Sorcerer's Stone, after all. Harry leaned forward. Quirrell was mumbling something. Snape interrupted him. Have you found out how to get past that beast of Hagrid's yet? But Severus, You don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell, said Snape, taking a step toward him. I don't know what you know perfectly well what I mean. An owl hooted loudly, and Harry nearly fell out of the tree. He steadied himself in the time to hear Snape say, Your little bit of hocus pocus. I'm waiting. But don't sleep very well, Snape cut in. We'll have another little chat soon, when you've had time to think of things over and decide where your loyalties lie. He threw his cloak over his head and strode out of the clearing. It was almost dark now, and Harry could see Quirrell standing quite still, as though he was petrified. Harry, where have you been? Hermione squeaked. We won, you won, we won, shouted Ron, thumping Harry on the back, and I gave Malfoy a black eye, and Neville tried to take on Crabbe and Goyle single-handed. He's still out cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be all right. Talk about showing Slytherin. Everyone's waiting for you in the common room. We're having a party. Fred and George stole some cakes and stuff from the kitchens. Never mind that now, said Harry breathlessly. Let's find the empty room. You'll wait till you hear this. He made sure Peeves wasn't inside before shutting the door behind him. Then he told them what he'd seen and heard. So we were right. It is the Sorcerer's Stone, and Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and he said something about Quirrell's hocus pocus. I reckon there are other things guarding the stone apart from Fluffy, loads of enchantments probably, and Quirrell would have done some anti-dark spell that Snape needs to break through. So you mean the stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape? Said Hermione in alarm. It'll be gone by next Tuesday, said Ron. And that is the chapter 13, Nicholas Flamel. So let's get into your trivia questions. Number 1, who put a leg locker curse on Neville? Again, question number 1, who put a leg locker curse on Neville? Question number 2, how many uses are there for dragon's blood? Again, question number 2, how many uses are there from dragon's blood? Question number 3, who tried to take on both Crabbe and Goyle? Again, question number 3, who tried to take on both Crabbe and Goyle? All right, so now we're going to get into your activity. So your activity, it's something that I do. I've learned how to do when I was younger, and I still do now, but it involves crocheting. So it's summer here in South Texas, so it's not exactly Quidditch weather. We can't wear scarves and cozy jackets and things like that because it's too hot for that right now. We all know that, right? So instead of gearing up for Quidditch games with scarves and gloves, we're going to make your own mini house scarf keychains, okay? All you need is some yarn and a crochet hook. You can start small with this mini project. Little tiny scarf. You'll be able to learn the basics of how to crochet, and you can practice on them and then use your skills to learn how to make a real house scarf so that you can show off during our cooler months. All right, so let's go ahead and get into that video right now. All right, everyone, let's get started. So we are doing our Harry Potter house scarf keychain. So you're going to need some sort of ring keychain. You can use a D-ring too. You'll need some yarn. You can either do this with one color yarn, or you can go ahead and try it with 2. It's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then you're going to need also a crochet hook. And you can get these at Walmart. Hobby Lobby, any kind of craft store, anywhere where they have yarn, they're going to have one of these. All right, so we're going to get started with our green. I'm just using colors that I have already available, and I was really happy because I had Slytherin colors. So I'm going to start with the green, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make what I call a magic circle. So I'm going to have my yarn. I'm going to cross it over to make a loop, okay? Then I'm going to bring the long part of my yarn through the hoop, and I'm going to pull it so it makes a knot. So I have a circle here. This is my magic ring. The knot, I have a tail end piece, and then the rest is into the big ball of yarn. So this is where you're going to place your hook. So I'm going to grab my hook, my crochet hook, and I'm going to put it into this magic ring, and then I'm going to pull up the knot to tighten it. So it'll be just like this around your hook, and this is how you're going to work through your crochet. Now the way I like to hold my stuff when I crochet is the tail part, the loose end part, I like to just hold in my hand, and then my crochet hook I hold like a pencil almost, okay? And then I hold the rest of the yarn that's going to be in the ball of yarn that you're going to be working with in my left hand so that I can work through everything. So now that I have that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to get your keychain, okay? It can be any kind of keychain you want, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it here. Oh, there you go. Okay. So I'm going to get my crochet hook, and I'm going to pull it or push it into my key ring. I'm going to hook and grab this yarn and bring it through so it looks like this. So I should have now 2 pieces of yarn on my hook, okay? I'm going to hold it there, and I'm going to use my hook to grab a piece of my working yarn, right? So I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to pull it through both of these loops that are already on my crochet hook. So this piece is going to pull through 1 and 2, okay? So it should look like that, and then I'm going to keep doing it again. I go through my keychain, I grab a piece of my working yarn with my hook and bring it through. So again, I have 2 pieces on my crochet hook. I'm going to grab a piece of my working yarn again and bring it through both pieces. Pull it 1 and 2. Okay? So as you're going through, we're only going to make 4 of these, but as you're going through, you're going to see it almost like 2 pieces of braids. So the way I have my hair in braids like this, and you see these little shapes here, you're going to see the same sort of shape here. Okay? So I have 1 braid here and another braid there. So I'm going to make 2 more the same way. Go into my keychain, pull my working yarn through. Again, I have 2 pieces of yarn on my crochet hook. Grab my working yarn and pull it through both pieces. Okay, so now I have, you see 3 braids. Okay, then I'm going to do it one more time. Through my keychain, grab my working yarn, 2 pieces on my crochet hook, grab my working yarn and pull through. Okay, so now I have 4 braided pieces on my keychain. Those are the pieces that we're going to work with throughout the rest of your keychain scarf. So now that I have those 4 pieces, my next step, this is your first layer. My next step is I'm going to do a single loop. So instead of going under and in my keychain, all I'm going to do from here is go straight to my working yarn hook it, and pull it through the one piece of yarn I have on my crochet hook. Okay, so it's a little different. From here, I'm going to flip my keychain around. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing that we did before, but instead of going through our keychain hole, we're going to actually go through the braids that we made over here. And I'll show you the way that works. So I am going to go into this space right here on my keychain. So my first braid right here, I am going to turn it and go under that first braid and all the way through. Then I'm grabbing my working yarn and pulling it back up, and you'll see that we're in the same kind of position that we were in before, where we have two pieces of yarn on your crochet hook. You're going to loop your working yarn and pull it through. Okay? Then you're going to do the same thing. So my next braided piece right here, right there, I'm going to go under it. So I'm going to push my hook through and under the braid. See? Grab my working yarn, bring it through. I got two pieces of yarn now on my hook. Grab my working yarn again and pull it through both pieces. Okay, so that's my second one. I have two more braids here. I'm going under the third one, pull my working yarn through, and pull through those two. And under my last one, grab my working yarn, two pieces of yarn on my crochet hook, grab my working yarn, and normally I would bring my working yarn through, but now we're going to go ahead and we're going to change colors into the silver so that we can have the pattern for our scarf. So I'm going to leave this to where I have a piece of working yarn of the green and then my tail. You don't got to worry about the tail right now. But now I'm going to grab my silver yarn, and it's gray, but I call it silver. And what I'm going to do is, normally we wrap over the working yarn of the green and bring it through these two pieces that are on our crochet hook, but instead I'm going to kind of do a little trick here, and I'm going to pull in silver instead. So I'm going to pretend this is my working yarn, and I'm going to pull the silver through these two so that when I start my next layer, it's already going to be the silvery gray color that I need. Okay, so then I'm going to do a one loop. So I'm not pulling in, going in anywhere. I'm just doing the same thing I did before when we went up a level. Every time you go up a level, all you're going to do is grab your working yarn and bring it through that one piece of yarn you had on your hook. Okay, and again we're turning. So again, I have 4 braids here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go under each of them so that I can go ahead and continue. And you'll see eventually it starts making little holes for you. So there's a hole right there that's under the first braid. That's the one I'm going into. I'm going to grab my working yarn, which is now my gray one, remember, and I'm grabbing that, pulling it through. Again, I have 2 pieces of yarn on my hook. Grab your working yarn, which again is the gray. Oops. Make sure you're not working with the tail of the gray. My bad. Again, grabbing, pulling through, and so now you're switching and you're making the gray layers. Again, pushing through the second braid, right under it, grabbing your yarn. So now you have the 2 on your hook. You grab your working yarn again and pull it through both of them. And then again, under the 3rd braid, pulling through, grab your working yarn, pull it through both pieces. And then your last one again, under the braid, pulling it through, And there we go. So now we're going to go into the next layer. So one more time, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have a single loop or a single chain. All right. So from here again, I'm not going under, I'm not going to do anything. All I'm doing is grabbing my working yarn and pulling it through to make one loop to go up to the next level. I turn again, and again I have 4 braids that I'm working with. You go under each of them, okay? And they have those little holes, so this is the first one I'm going into. Down, pulling it through. I have 2 pieces of yarn on my hook, and I pull through. So you're going to keep doing that. This is 2, this is 3, this is 4. Now here, because we had 2 layers of green that we did, we're going to have 2 layers of silver. This is my 4th one of the silver. So I'm going to go through my braid, and I'm going to bring it through like this so that I have the 2 pieces on my crochet hook, and then remember, instead of bringing in the gray again to pull through and finish out that layer, I'm going to grab the working piece of yarn of my green, which is this one. It's the longer one attached to the rest of your yarn, and I'm going to grab that, I'm going to pull it up, and that's what I'm going to use to pull through the silver. Okay? And then again, I'm going to make another layer, so I'm going to do a single chain to bring it up. I twist, and then you continue on. And you're going to keep this pattern to make your keychain scarf as long as you want it to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue this pattern, and I'm going to show you the end product. Okay? I just want to show you kind of how it looks after I do a couple of layers really nicely, so you can see the pattern go through. So it looks really cool afterwards. Okay, so you're going to alternate so that it'll alternate green, gray, as long as you want it to. Okay? And I will show you the end product in a minute. Alright everyone, so I have my keychain the length that I want it. I think this is a pretty good size. See? And so I went up 2 layers of each, green, silver, green, silver, green, silver, green. And this is the last of my green, and I'm going to show you how I just finish it off. I'm going through the last stitch, so my last braid, and instead of pulling through the gray, since I'm done now, I can just keep it at the green. And up. And then what I like to do is I actually like to go ahead and make another single chain. So again, like the same way you would before when you were just going up a level, just hook your working yarn and pull it through. And I like to pull it out a little bit, and then I can start cutting my yarn. So I can pull this now at the end, and it makes its own little knot at the end, so you don't have to worry about it so much. So now I'm also going to cut off the gray, so I can get this out of the way. And all I'm going to do now is kind of seal off my ends. So my 2 tails that are right here with the green and the silver, all I'm going to do is make a knot. And there's different ways to do this. Sometimes when you crochet, some people prefer that you pull the ends into the crochet as you're working through, but I find that when you're first starting to learn, that can be kind of confusing and tricky, so this is just an easy way to do it. So I just make a quick double knot, and I'll cut off the ends. And then up here, since my gray ends lower than my green, I'm going to use my crochet hook to pull this gray up to the top to match this one. So I'm going to go up a little bit and pull it through, and up a little bit further and pull it through so that it's up to the same level as my green, and then I'm going to do the same thing and just tie a knot here. And if you want to, you can also cut little shorter pieces of your same color yarn, and you can tie knots at the end of your scarf keychain, and it'll make a little fringe. So you can do that as well if you want to. And I cut this off. And there we go. So that's your house scarf keychain. And so you're basically learning with this activity the basics of crocheting in general. Once you kind of get the hang of it, you can expand your skills to make anything. You can make a big scarf, you can make hats, you can make gloves, you can make blankets, you name it. So it's definitely a good tool and a good skill to learn. All right, so there you go, guys. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us on this week's episode of our Girl Scout Virtual Book Club. I appreciate all of you so much, and I hope you all are doing well. And I can't wait to see you guys next week. Thanks, guys. Bye.